Today I'll be going over Alanna and Nash's book, The Colonel. We'll be going over chapter 15, which is titled Trouble in the Kingdom. The Colonel tightens his grip. Nash writes, quote, in March 1963, Parker worried about the arrival of a different kind of visitor, though there was nothing in her demeanor to indicate that she would become a pivotal figure in anyone's life, let alone the Colonel's. Petite, pretty, empty-headed except for the usual teenage obsessions, and positively goony-eyed with love, 16-year-old Priscilla Ann Beaulieu had captured Elvis's heart in Germany, and now she was moving to Memphis, end quote. Priscilla, the stepdaughter of an American Air Force captain stationed near Friedberg, told a friend in Texas she intended to meet Elvis and did so within a week and a half. Lamar Fike recalled that she arrived at Elvis's house wearing a blue and white sailor suit with white socks. Fike remembers, I said, God almighty, Elvis, she's cute as she can be, but she's 14 years old. We'll end up in prison for life. I watched that from the very beginning with abject fear. Parker already knew about Priscilla through entourage reports and press coverage. Life magazine had photographed her saying goodbye to Elvis at Ryan, Maine Air Base, calling her the girl he left behind. Elvis publicly downplayed the relationship, but he had spent his last night in Germany with her, asked her to write on pink stationery so her letters stood out, and later brought her to the U.S. for visits. He persuaded Captain Beaulieu to let Priscilla move to Memphis and attend Immaculate Conception High School, emphasizing its strict environment. The understanding was that Elvis might eventually marry her, although he gave no timeline, simply insisting, I want her here, according to Priscilla. Priscilla was supposed to live with Vernon and Dee Presley on Hermitage Road under supervision, but within weeks she was staying at Graceland. Minnie Mae Presley acted as a lenient chaperone. Priscilla later said she shared Elvis's bed, chastely, she maintains, and began following his nighttime schedule and pill routine. Parker had kept Anita Wood from visiting Elvis in Germany to protect his image, but he liked Priscilla personally. Still, he feared scandal. First, their age gap, and also Elvis's film contracts contain morals clauses. Parker remembered how Jerry Lee Lewis's marriage to his underage cousin had damaged his career. It wasn't as bad as Jerry Lee's situation, but Parker feared that if Elvis's relationship became public, it could cause a scandal and jeopardize his movie contracts. He was also constantly concerned about potential paternity lawsuits. Nash writes, quote, if Elvis insisted on living with Priscilla for any length of time, the Colonel saw they needed to marry, and Parker told him so. A marriage might calm Elvis down, especially in Hollywood, where the starlets lined up to be admitted to his parties, end quote. Okay, so I find this part interesting because I've heard that Elvis didn't want to get married, but was pressured into it by Parker and Priscilla's parents. In Priscilla's book, she was adamant that it was Elvis's decision to marry her and no one else had any influence in it. Anyway, while Elvis filmed Fun in Acapulco, Priscilla remained in Memphis. She, as well as others, noticed that his heavy use of uppers, downers, and sleeping pills contributed to increasingly erratic behavior. He once threw a pool cue at a woman, injuring her shoulder and collarbone, then broke down in remorse. Elvis felt trapped making 3 and soon 4 lightweight travelogue films a year, suffering anxiety and even nosebleeds on set. Fun in Acapulco was an unintended parallel to Andreas Van Kalk's life. Elvis plays a former circus performer who, after his brother dies in an accident, flees his past and begins a new life in another country. Director Richard Thorpe, who also made Jailhouse Rock, included a child manager who takes 50% of his clients' earnings while calling himself a partner. Because Elvis could not travel to Mexico, the studio used background projection and other process shots. By 1961, RCA drew most Elvis singles from his weak movie soundtracks. Good Luck Charm reached #1, while Can't Help Falling in Love and Return to Sender reached #2, but some releases stalled in the 30s. Parker pressured Bill Bullock at RCA's New York office to keep Elvis's records successful. RCA staff were instructed to always remain friendly with the Colonel, partly because Parker had previously helped get an executive fired. His authority even overruled Elvis's musical preferences. If Elvis wanted his voice blended into the music, but Parker wanted it louder, RCA followed Parker's decision. In early 1962, Parker negotiated new RCA deals involving previously released recordings. Income from these, what Parker called joint ventures, would be split 50-50 between Elvis and Parker. Parker insisted the RCA contract be kept to one page without any legal jargon and renegotiated it 7 months later. It left RCA with almost no control. Although RCA's lawyers backed out of plans for a 43-city tour in late 1962, costing Elvis an artistic opportunity and over $1 million, Parker remained the unquestioned authority. RCA employees panicked whenever Parker arrived unexpectedly. Joan Deary, Steve Scholz's secretary, arranged an advance warning so she could tidy the office and put out an autographed Christmas photo of Parker that he had gifted to Scholz before she met him at the elevator. The first time this happened, Deary remembers, "None of us liked it, and we'd put it in a drawer behind the door to Steve's office. I went flying in there to pull it out, and I banged into Steve, who was also trying to get the picture out of the cabinet and on display." Unlike most RCA employees, Ann Fulcino challenged Parker. In early 1963, she visited Elvis at Paramount and found him unhappy and embarrassed by his poor quality films. She then explained her plan for improving the promotion and chart performance of his records. Elvis agreed with Ann that his music and films needed major changes. She believed he knew Parker's direction conflicted with his own goals, yet Elvis still allowed himself to remain trapped in unsuitable projects. While filming Kissin' Cousins, Elvis told Yvonne Craig that Parker would decide when he should return to dramatic roles. Elvis felt unable to challenge Parker, who had even denied his request to approve scripts. Nash describes Elvis's reluctance to stand up for himself as a fatal flaw. Elvis's reluctance to challenge Parker traced back to Gladys, who taught him to fear authority after Vernon went to prison in 1938. That caution may have helped him survive childhood poverty, but later made it difficult for him to stand up to Parker, even as Vernon began questioning Parker's decisions. Elvis mocked Parker privately, but remained submissive to him in person. His inability to confront Parker limited his personal growth, deepened his self-hatred, and contributed to his increasing dependence on pills to numb his anger. Viva Las Vegas was a turning point because Anne Margaret had genuine on-screen chemistry with Elvis. The pairing energized the familiar musical formula, and Parker should have seen that future films needed equally strong co-stars and chemistry. Nash writes, quote, "But Parker was threatened by an actress who both competed with his star and engaged Elvis's attention off-screen, as Anne Margaret did from the start. And it's true, as the Colonel complained, that it was difficult to distinguish just whose film it was." End quote. Instead of promoting Elvis and Anne Margaret's chemistry, Parker complained that she received too many close-ups and flattering shots. He reduced their duets to one song and blocked MGM from giving her special billing that might have attracted a wider audience for Elvis. Parker told the studio, "If someone else should ride on our back, then we should get a better saddle." Parker failed to recognize how Viva Las Vegas revived Elvis's enthusiasm and musical energy, especially through the title song. Instead, he brought veteran singer Gene Austin to the set and had Elvis perform the songs for his critique. Austin's wife, Lucille, remembers, "He was singing one song and the Colonel said, 'Now, Elvis, I don't like about 8 bars of that. Call David Houston,' Austin's godson, then a hopeful country singer, "and sing it to him. And then tell him to give you the Gene Austin licks for those bars." Elvis was upset with this, but didn't say anything and instead continued having a conversation with Lucille. She recalls, "When you'd pay him a compliment, he'd always say, 'Thank you, ma'am, honey.'" Directed by George Sidney, Viva Las Vegas became Elvis's highest-grossing film, earning $5.5 million by 1969, compared with his usual $3 million. Its success showed the value of stronger co-stars, directors, and scripts, but Parker focused only on the fact that it had gone over budget. Parker preferred low-cost producers Sam Katzman and Joe Pasternak, who worked quickly and rarely challenged him. When Katzman asked him to read Kissin' Cousins, Parker jokingly demanded $10,000 and refused. The film embarrassed Elvis, and Katzman later produced Harum Scarum, which was Elvis's worst movie of his career. Joe Pasternak warned Parker that Elvis's salary consumed 70 to 80% of a film's budget. Parker refused to reduce Elvis's price, insisting the producers cut costs everywhere else. Both Girl Happy and Spin Out were filmed in only 32 days. Elvis resented the cheap production of films like Kissin' Cousins, where Lance DeGault was visibly used as a stand-in because Sam Katzman refused to reshoot the scene. He was especially hurt when he read that Hal Wallace said profits from Elvis's movies financed prestigious films like Beckett. His frustration often surfaced during soundtrack sessions at radio recorders, where he disliked recording weak songs such as "No Room to Roomba in a Sports Car," "Do the Clam," and Petunia, the gardener's daughter. There, after criticizing someone in the business and getting laughs, he quickly said, "I didn't mean that, guys. The Colonel told me to always say nice things." Freddie Beanstalk was aware of the situation but couldn't do anything about it. He remembers, "Once we started on the MGM contract with 4 pictures a year, it was like a factory. Each producer would send me 10 or 11 drafts of the script, and I would mark those scenes where a song could be done without being absolutely ridiculous, and then I would give those scripts to 7 or 8 songwriting teams. I'd wind up with 4 or 5 songs for each spot, and then I would take them to Elvis, and he would choose which one to do. But there was no way to have better music, because from the moment one picture was finished, we would have to get started on the next one." Elvis felt embarrassed making mediocre films while the Beatles challenged his musical standing, though the Roustabout soundtrack still topped their album. But Hollywood may have preserved Elvis's fame and income during the changing 1960s. Journalist Michael Streisketh argues Elvis might also have struggled as a full-time recording artist because RCA adapted slowly to new rock trends and Elvis did not write his own songs. Streisketh says, "By dumb luck, the movie years had the effect of preserving Elvis economically while the wild music environment passed over. Elvis was not spent from years of musical rejection, so when the time was right and people were ready to see him in concert, he was fresh and ready to pounce on the opportunity. Inadvertently, Parker's decisions in the early and mid-60s gave us the great Elvis music of the very late 60s and early 70s. Beginning around 1963, Parker became increasingly distant from Elvis and spent much of his time in Palm Springs. He stayed first at the Spa Hotel, then at 888 Regal Drive, a house provided by William Morris. In the mid-1960s, he suffered his third heart attack, began using a cane, and later, once his strength returned, turned it into part of his public image. Byron Raphael ran into him at the TikTok restaurant in Los Angeles and was shocked by Parker's decline after his heart attack. "He really changed. He had that cane and he was bent over. It shocked me because he was like an old man." Parker publicly blamed a bad bag, but privately he feared another heart attack would kill him. He adopted a live for today attitude, saying, "You don't see any hearses with luggage racks." Thus, only the best would do. Parker persuaded Frances Lasvogel, Abe's wife, to give him the larger $250,000 Palm Springs house at 1166 Vista Vespero. Marie decorated it entirely in blue and white, while Parker stocked a commercial freezer with large amounts of meat he loved, despite his growing girth. He accepted his size as part of his psychological heft, though his doctor wanted him to lose weight. Parker sometimes appeared at recording sessions and tried to boost Elvis's mood by buying lunch and joking with Nashville musicians like Bob Moore and Buddy Harman. He cultivated their loyalty and once even ordered Hal Wallace out of the producer's chair so Moore could sit there. He sometimes humiliated Elvis in front of the studio executives. After Wallace complained that Elvis looked overweight in Viva Las Vegas, Parker angrily interrogated Marty Lacker about Elvis's eating habits, who told him, "He's just been eating what he always eats." Parker pounded the floor with his cane, then held it to the sky and demanded, "Don't lie to me, tell me." Nash writes, quote, "But it wasn't so much Presley's eating habit that altered his looks as it was his pharmaceutical habit," according to Lacker, one of the entourage members who alternately carried Presley's black makeup kit, which the singer filled with pills. Often, they dictated his moods, end quote. At the next session, Elvis's temper showed. Lacker remembers, "He had this big orchestra in there, and he started singing. He didn't settle for the first take. They were getting ready to do it again, and Elvis reached his breaking point. He started ranting. 'I'm tired of all these effing songs, and I'm tired of these damn movies. I get in a fight with somebody in one scene, and in the next one I'm kissing the dog. What difference does it make how many times we do the song? I'll tell you what, you just cut the tracks for this next movie, and I'll come in later and put my voice on.'" Soon after, Parker nearly begged Elvis to join him, Marie, and the Tuckers for dinner, but Elvis refused. After years of keeping their relationship strictly business, not even sharing a meal, Elvis had no interest in becoming socially close now. With Elvis locked into movie and record contracts, Parker focused more on having a good time. When a promoter called about taking Elvis on tour, Parker told him Elvis was tied up for the next 3.5 years, but if the promoter wanted, he could rent the gold lame suit for the weekend for $5,000. Parker also planned a touring display of Elvis's cars. His studio office's staff cost him little or nothing. Jim O'Brien was paid by Hill and Range, Irv Schechter, John Hartman, and later Gabe Tucker by William Morris, and Grellin Landon by RCA. Parker jokingly called Jim O'Brien Sergeant, but only Tom Diskin held real authority. The others acted like privates carrying out Parker's plans. Each morning, staff at Elvis Exploitations prepared VIP birthday lists and sang over the phone on Parker's command, even when employees like John Hartman found it demeaning. Gabe Tucker said the staff did little real work. His duties included attending Parker's pipe and running the office cookhouse where Parker cooked slumgullion, a boiled stew that reminded him of his hobo days. Parker usually ordered food in, but sometimes turned lunches into pranks, having actor Bob Issenberg dress as a chef and piling ham onto Abe Lasvogel's plate to make him uncomfortable. Lasvogel was Jewish. He also had Gabe Tucker call random MGM executives and pressure them into buying the staff dinner. Parker's tests escalated. When he requested a loan for Vernon Presley, supposedly to buy a Memphis skating rink, RCA's president sent $1 million without any paperwork. Parker treated such requests as tests of his power and influence. He spent increasing amounts of time in Palm Springs near Milton Powell and Hal Wallace, while also keeping an apartment at the Wilshire Comstock in Los Angeles. Wallace continued indulging Parker's humor, even sending him a dish from England's Elephant Club, which Parker jokingly thanked him for stealing. Wallace wrote back, "I could tell you that I bought it, but I know that you would have a lot more respect for me if you felt that I had lifted it." But despite being cordial with one another, their relationship was still strained. However, Wallace did persuade Parker to read the carnival-themed Roustabout script, partly inspired by Parker's past. Parker later praised Wallace's ability to pull a film together, saying he had a magic wand and expressing unusual respect and affection. Parker's praise may have been intended to soothe Wallace. Screenwriter Alan Weiss remembers, "When I was doing Roustabout, I went to Palm Springs and spent a weekend with the Colonel, interviewing him specifically on his circus background. When I got back, Hal Wallace said, 'How did it go?' I told him it went fairly well and I thought we had a good subject for Elvis. Then he said, 'It was an expensive weekend.' I thought, oh my God, is he referring to the hotel I stayed at or what? I learned later that the Colonel had billed him for his time." Parker and Wallace sometimes stopped speaking after disagreements, then acted as though nothing had happened. Parker enjoyed provoking him, placing his hat on a valuable Rodin sculpture involving Wallace with Marie's grandchildren Tommy and Sharon, and greeting guests at a black tie party wearing only Bermuda shorts. But underneath it all, Parker was struggling with depression, fears about his heart, growing distance from Elvis, and concern for Marie. He also resented her devotion to her cats, especially a male cat named Midnight, because Parker preferred dogs and was jealous of the attention she gave it. Lamar Fike remembers, "I was at the house one day and Colonel and I were sitting in the den talking. Marie came in all distraught and said, 'Midnight's on the roof! Midnight's on the roof!' Colonel said, 'He'll come down.' She came back in a little while and said, 'Midnight's still on the roof. Do something.' So Colonel went out with the hose about as big as a fireman's with tremendous pressure and aimed it at that cat and blew it over the garage and the porte cochere and out into the street. It landed on its feet, but boy was it surprised. Colonel came back in and said, 'Now that's how you get a cat off a roof.' That's not nice." Parker hadn't abandoned all compassion, though. As Marie's health declined, she told Gabe Tucker and her brother Bitsy that living with Parker caused constant stress and severe headaches that left her unable to think clearly. Parker believed Marie's mental condition was worsening. Meanwhile, severe arthritis made it difficult to leave her alone. After the Tuckers moved out, he arranged for RCA sales manager Jack Burgess to stay up with her at night and play cards. When Burgess could no longer stay with Marie, Irv Schechter, one of her favorites, took over. Schechter may have welcomed the escape from Parker's office, where the stress had apparently given him ulcers. Nash writes, quote, "It was during the 1964 making of Roustabout that Elvis met Larry Geller, who would become one of the most significant members of the Memphis Mafia and perhaps Presley's purest friend," end quote. So I read Larry's new book, Unchained Melody, recently, and I must say that I do feel like Larry was one of the kinder, gentler souls around Elvis. In April 1964, Geller, a hairdresser, visited Elvis's Perigo Way home through Alan Fortas. Their conversation about spirituality and metaphysics deeply affected Elvis, who said he often wondered about his purpose and believed an unseen force had guided him since childhood. "Why was I plucked out of all the millions of lives to be Elvis?" The next day, at Elvis's request, Geller brought him the book The Impersonal Life at Paramount. Elvis then began studying Eastern religion and spirituality daily, with Geller as his guide. Parker, Priscilla, and the entourage soon viewed Geller as a threat to their influence over Elvis, though. In December 1964, Parker signed Elvis to 2 United Artists films, Frankie and Johnny and Clambake, for $650,000 each. With Abe Laswell's help, he also secured a record-setting $1 million deal with MGM. He secured a 3-picture deal, $1 million for the first film, including $250,000 paid at $1,000 a week over 5 years, then $750,000 each for 2 more films, plus 40% of the profits. Parker was thrilled that he had made Elvis Hollywood's highest paid actor and secured deals totaling $35 million since they began working together. Nash writes, quote, "But to the Colonel's great disappointment, Elvis didn't seem particularly pleased about the new contract. In fact, since the May departure of Joe Esposito, the foreman of the entourage and the Colonel's chief spy, Parker couldn't even get his client on the phone," end quote. In October, Elvis showed unusual independence by insisting he be home in Memphis for Thanksgiving. Filming delays made the timing tight, but he was finally released on Tuesday, November 24th, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, and began the cross-country trip home with a caravan of cars and a Dodge mobile home to boot. In late February, Elvis recorded the Harem Scarum soundtrack, his first studio session in 8 months, but he resisted its weak Middle Eastern-themed songs. Aware of Elvis's growing frustration, Parker pressured Marty Lacker, the new Memphis Mafia foreman, to get Elvis and the entourage to California on time for filming. Elvis delayed returning to California, choosing instead to meditate and study with Larry Geller. Marty Lacker told Parker that Elvis was not ready, while the studio threatened breach of contract. Overwhelmed by the pressure, Parker had Marie call Harry Jenkins, who had replaced Bill Bullock at RCA, as part of a scheme to avoid the studio's calls. She told him, "My husband is deathly ill. It's a bad situation." She had even ordered a hospital bed. Jenkins alerted MGM and Gabe Tucker, who rushed from Houston fearing another heart attack, only to find Parker healthy enough to meet him at the airport. Tucker said, "God damn, Colonel, you scared the hell out of me. Mr. Jenkins said you was in bad shape." Parker told him, "Well, I didn't feel good yesterday." Tucker privately admired Elvis for finally standing up to Parker, but he also felt sympathy for Parker, who wanted recognition for making Elvis a superstar and feared that, despite securing a historic deal, he was losing control of his client. Tucker helped Parker settle into a bed beside the pool, wondering whether he truly was ill. As they reminisce about their 25 years together, the phone rang nonstop because Elvis still had not reported to the studio. Tucker remembers, "They was on him something awful. I never heard such cussing and carrying on, and he didn't usually do that. Finally, I said, 'Colonel, why don't you tell him to kiss your ass? You got all the money you need. You can just tell everybody that you managed the highest paid truck driver in the world.' And he laughed, but he said, 'God damn, Gabe, that ain't funny.'" In March, Elvis finally left Memphis for California, driving through the night. During the trip, Larry Geller explained to him that spiritual awakening required surrendering the ego, not just intellectual study. When Elvis became separated from the caravan, he welcomed the solitude, saying he needed time to focus on what was happening within himself. Near Flagstaff, Arizona, Elvis believed he saw Joseph Stalin's face in a cloud, which then transformed into the face of Christ. Overcome with emotion, he told Geller that he had surrendered his ego and life to God and finally experienced the spiritual awakening he had been seeking. Geller remembers, "It was like a lightning bolt went right through him. He said, 'Larry, I know the truth now. I don't believe in God anymore. Now I know that God is a living reality. He's everywhere. He's within us. He's in everyone's heart.'" When they got to California, Elvis told Geller he wanted to quit making teeny bopper movies, leave show business, and possibly enter a monastery. Geller persuaded him that he could pursue a higher purpose through his existing career. Parker soon learned about Elvis's spiritual involvement with the Self-Realization Fellowship led by Sri Mata, and he was not happy. Things started to unravel shortly after. During Harem Scarum, Parker rarely visited the set, but expected the entourage to serve him like a commander. One day, he deliberately seated Larry Geller beside him, making Geller uncomfortable. Larry says, "He knew that I had Elvis's ear and that Elvis was changing and he couldn't figure me out." Parker sometimes tried to disarm Geller with friendliness, but their relationship remained tense. On this occasion, he flattered Geller's presence and suggested he should become a stage hypnotist, implying that Geller's influence over Elvis was manipulative. Nash writes, quote, "By now, the Colonel had reinstalled his pipeline, Joe Esposito, who shared co-foreman duties with Marty Lacker. Elvis seemed resigned to the arrangement, telling Geller he knew the Colonel had been taking care of Joe all of those years and that he didn't care." End quote. A couple of days later, after filming ended, Parker summoned Elvis to MGM through Joe, and Elvis, Geller, and the entourage immediately drove over in 2 cars. Geller remembers, "We went over to the lot, and about 10 minutes later, Elvis walked out. We knew he was ticked. He got in the car and he said, 'That mother effer man, he accused me of being on a religious kick. My life is not a religious kick. I'll show that fat bastard what a kick is.' He fumed for days." Elvis's resentment finally erupted over the bad scripts, weak music, and Parker's interference. He insisted Parker was only his manager, not his personal friend, and should stay out of his private life. Parker kept his criticism of Elvis private, but decided to tighten his control. As Elvis and their partnership deteriorated, Parker planned to manage him more aggressively and rule with an iron fist. Parker rationalized that stricter control was necessary because Elvis could not manage himself. Meanwhile, Hollywood's confidence was fading. Wallace and Hazen expected Paradise Hawaiian Style to be Elvis's last good picture, followed by Easy Come, Easy Go. Charles Boasberg, president of Paramount's distributing company, warned that Frankie and Johnny was failing nationwide and was Elvis's second poor film in a row. Parker battled Hazen over nearly every part of the new contract. Wallace defended Parker, but Hazen accused him of, quote, "the height of duplicity," and trying to secure every advantage for himself. Parker nevertheless viewed the deal as another victory. Marty Lacker remembers, "One day Elvis came up to me and said, 'The Colonel wants you to take him to Palm Springs.' I had never done that before, and I thought it was a very strange request considering our relationship. Lacker reluctantly drove Parker to Palm Springs. After a long silence, Parker made an anti-Semitic remark. Boy, I showed them goddamn Jews, didn't I? Despite knowing Lacker was Jewish. Lacker remembers, I wanted to take that car and head it into a pole, figure out how to kill him without hurting myself. In 1966, Parker tried to pressure Wallace and Hazen into another film deal, sending them a mocking Snowman's League report and a threatening image of himself holding a machete. But his tactics no longer worked. Easy Come, Easy Go nearly went unreleased because the studio wasn't sure if the film would recoup its cost, and after Wallace reimbursed Parker $3,500 for promotion, he ended their business relationship for good. By late 1965, MGM's Elvis formula was collapsing. Tiny budgets, fake foreign settings, falling grosses, and absurd plots. Parker admitted Harum Scarum, shot in only 18 days, was nearly impossible to sell and advised releasing it quickly, collecting what money they could and moving on. In February 1966, rumors began to pop up in Tennessee that Elvis was retiring or changing managers, and even that Parker was retiring. Parker called the Memphis Commercial Appeal, denying the rumors, and he said, Heck yes, I would retire, and so would my boy, if we received enough money to retire. We have contracts for 14 additional motion pictures to be made over a period of several years. Parker's judgment was still off, though. His loyalty led him to keep hiring Norman Taurog despite Taurog's declining talent and eyesight. Taurog admitted during Double Trouble that he was blind in one eye and later became completely blind, yet still directed Speedway and Live a Little, Love a Little, two of Elvis's weakest films. Even devoted fans complained that Elvis's films had fallen to drive-in releases and recycled the same weak plots and songs. Fan clubs warned that the movies were insulting and that his career was clearly declining. Despite a lucrative offer from Japan, Parker refused, claiming Elvis was booked through 1969. Parker told Byron Raphael he could reject offers and demand record-breaking money because Elvis was a three-tiered client, a major force in records, movies, and live performances. That made Elvis valuable enough that Parker felt no need to manage anyone else. He said, Byron, we don't need the movie business. If we couldn't do movies, we could do personal appearances for $50,000 a night. And if we couldn't do personal appearances, we could do records. We have gigantic record sales. I wouldn't do it otherwise. But in 1966, RCA rejected Parker's request for $500,000 to finance a major tour of personal appearances, partly because it was unclear where the money would go. Elvis's sales were also falling. Album orders that had once reached 2 million copies had dropped by half, and RCA planned to reduce his guaranteed advance. Parker still had plans for Elvis, but only if he could keep him functioning. First, Parker wanted Elvis to shift his focus and priorities. Parker invited Larry Geller and his wife and kids to Parker's Palm Springs home for the day for swimming and lounging. Later, Parker took Geller inside the house and questioned him about his spiritual beliefs. Then the phone rang. Parker answered it, and during the phone call, Geller suspected Parker was discussing how to deal with him and his influence over Elvis. Larry remembers, he looked at me and he glanced away and he said, yes, right now. Well, yeah, right. But I dismissed it because I had no reason to be suspicious. After Parker hung up, he suggested they all get ice cream at Will Wright's ice cream parlor before the Gellers returned home to Los Angeles. Larry says, the minute I drove into the driveway, I saw the back door open. It was a precision strike. Their home had been broken into. The burglars ignored valuables and instead took Geller's spiritual files, church music tapes, and clothing while trashing the home. Frightened and devastated, Geller gathered his family and drove to see Elvis. Larry remembers, he shook his head back and forth a few times and said, all right, we know who did this. Elvis put the Gellers up in a hotel until they felt safe going home, but Elvis tried to downplay it by saying at least no one got hurt. Larry says, we just tried to repress it. Nash writes, quote, with Geller seemingly diffused, Parker now attacked the second order of business, getting Elvis married. The strange press release that Parker had written for 1961's Wild in the Country shows that the Colonel had been thinking of this for a long time, end quote. The press release read, quote, during the making of the film, Elvis was asked if the Colonel would object if Elvis married. The Colonel would have nothing to say about it, Elvis replied with more than usual emphasis. I probably would talk it over with him as a friend and as a man I respect, but never in the sense of asking his permission. When the boy wants to marry, I hope he'll ask me to help him do it, Parker said. Like a wise father, Colonel Parker takes an interest in the girls Elvis escorts, but doesn't interfere. He probably would step in if he thought Elvis were making some dreadful mistake, but it would be as a counselor, not as a commanding officer, end quote. By 1966, Priscilla was nearly 21, and her stepfather, Lieutenant Colonel Beaulieu, was pressuring Elvis to fulfill his implied promise to marry her. Parker feared that if Elvis backed out and Priscilla spoke to the press, he could face scandal for having housed an underage girl and then breaking her heart. Priscilla feared Elvis would never marry her, especially during his relationship with Anne Margaret. She flew to Hollywood hoping to end the romance, but Parker sent her back to Memphis to prevent reporters from questioning Elvis's relationship with Priscilla. Nash writes, quote, "Suddenly, everyone was thinking seriously about marriage. The colonel figured it would end Elvis's obsession with religion, keep him away from Anne Margaret and her smart young team of managers, and stem Elvis's growing fixation with guns and law enforcement. Priscilla hoped it would make him grow up. Why did he need all those guys around for slot car races and water balloon fights anyway? And Vernon, who still pretended to take care of Elvis's personal business, would be happy if it quelled his son's incessant spending," end quote. By late 1966, Elvis was buying a $300,000 Mississippi ranch and spending heavily on trucks, horses, and trailers for friends. Parker liked the spending because it kept Elvis financially dependent on working, while Vernon was alarmed by it. Vernon and Parker agreed that, yes, Elvis should marry Priscilla and reconnect with Parker. Elvis leased a Palm Springs home in September 1966 and spent Thanksgiving with Parker there. Returning to Graceland, Elvis became emotional after hearing "green, green grass of home," saying he saw his mother Gladys in the house. Just before Christmas 1966, Elvis proposed to Priscilla and tentatively planned the wedding for the next year. Rather than tell Anne Margaret, he simply stopped answering her calls. Parker considered pressuring Elvis to marry Priscilla the honorable choice, even though Elvis did not seem emotionally ready. 5 years earlier, Elvis had told Hedda Hopper he would marry only when deeply in love and wanted a proper church wedding, not an elopement. In March 1967, Elvis arrived for his next motion picture, Clambake, weighing 200 pounds, up 30 pounds from his usual 170. Jerry Schilling blamed depression and boredom with the films. Parker was furious, and Elvis used diet pills alongside sleeping pills and other drugs that left him dizzy. At his Roca Place rental, Elvis tripped over a television cord and struck his head on the sunken bathtub. Joe Esposito called Parker, who arrived with nurses, a doctor, and portable x-ray equipment. Elvis was diagnosed with a mild concussion, delaying Clambake for several weeks and setting up what Nash calls Parker's most egregious claim on Elvis's earnings. Marty Lacker remembers, "The colonel took us out in the hall and he said, 'God damn you guys, why do you let him get this way? He's going to mess up everything. They'll tear up the contract.' Then Parker turned his rage on Larry Geller. 'Get those books out of here right now. Do you understand me? Right now.' Lacker says, "The colonel went back in and talked to Elvis and he said, 'Here's the way it is. From now on, you're going to listen to everything I say. Otherwise, I'm going to leave you, and that will ruin your career, and you'll lose Graceland, and you'll lose your fans. And because I'm going to do all this extra work for you, I want 50% of your contract.'" Parker backdated a new agreement to January 1st. He would keep his 25% commission on Elvis's standard film salaries and RCA advances. Then All-Star Shows would also receive 50% of additional profits and royalties from movie, record, and side deals after the commission had already been deducted. The merchandising split stayed unchanged. Marty Lacker was surprised Elvis quickly accepted Parker's new financial agreement, but Elvis's depression and fear of Parker may have influenced him. According to Larry Geller, Parker had warned Elvis that the mafia killed Sam Cooke in 1964 for stepping out of line and told Elvis, "You've got to behave yourself. You can only go so far." Elvis reportedly came to view Parker as a dangerous enemy. About a week after Elvis's fall, Parker imposed new rules. Joe Esposito would be the sole foreman. No one could discuss religion with Elvis, and Larry Geller could not be alone with him. Parker also ordered salary cuts and warned that several entourage members might lose their jobs. No one was fired, but Larry Geller left voluntarily the next month. The guys noticed during Parker's meeting, Elvis appeared unusually submissive, just staring at the floor and saying nothing. At 9:41 a.m. on May 1st, 1967, Elvis and Priscilla married in a small surprise ceremony at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The wedding took place in Milton Pearl's suite and was performed by Nevada Supreme Court Judge David Zenoff. The justice remembers, "She was absolutely petrified and Elvis was so nervous he was almost bawling." After the ceremony, Elvis and Priscilla then flew to Palm Springs on Frank Sinatra's Learjet for their honeymoon, but it was more like Parker's wedding than Elvis's. Priscilla would later say, "It was the colonel who got the rings, the room, the judge. We didn't do any of that. It was all through his connections. We wanted it to be fast, effortless." Parker chose the wedding party and fewer than 20 guests, excluding most of the Memphis Mafia from the ceremony and causing lasting resentment. Larry Geller, once considered as best man, learned of the wedding through the newspaper and reflected that Parker controlled nearly nearly every part of Elvis's life, except his growing drug use. Grellin Landon, who worked with Parker from 1955 on, claimed Parker didn't know about Elvis's pill use during the MGM years. Others found that implausible, arguing Parker was kept informed and should have recognized Elvis's erratic behavior and excessive sweating as signs of prescription drug dependence. Parker may have denied the severity of Elvis's drug problem because discrete treatment options were limited and public exposure could interrupt work. True to his secretive nature, Parker chose to conceal what he viewed as Elvis's weakness rather than confront it. As Elvis increasingly used drugs to escape stress, Parker turned to gambling for excitement and relief. His gambling was compulsive and driven by the action rather than the money. It reflected his contradictory nature. Calculating yet reckless, protective yet self-destructive. By 1965, Parker's gambling losses were evident to associates, and he began requesting early payments from film contracts. RCA President Norman Racusin knew of his habit and assigned Harry Jenkins to keep him happy, which often meant accompanying Parker to Las Vegas craps tables. Parker would say, "Let's go down to the office." Although Parker earned enormous sums, his income was irregular, and his gambling losses left him frequently short of cash. RCA sometimes covered his debts, while he also sought advances or help from Hal Wallace, the Morris Agency, and RCA. Casinos extended credit because they expected someone would eventually pay. Parker was an acquaintance of Dick Contino, who was an accordionist reportedly courted by the mob early in his career and remained a favorite of Frank Sinatra. Contino says, "I'm sure there was an awful lot going on. It would be an obvious thing. If you've got a problem financially, these guys don't write notes. They ask you what you need. If they like you, you got it. Money is nothing, but respect, everything. My guess is that they asked for their favors in return and got them, maybe unbeknown to Elvis. I wouldn't criticize Tom for it. Why not?" That's it for Chapter 15. Stay tuned for Chapter 16, which is titled Black Leather Blues, the 68 Special. See you then.